Why exactly do we fear death? I mean, it's the one absolute certainty waiting for all of us at the end of the road. And yet, the human mind just completely stumbles when trying to face the simple fact that one day we won't be here. So let's dive right in and explore why that is. Picture this. You're sitting alone in a quiet, perfectly safe room. Nothing is threatening you. But why does the mere thought of your own mortality suddenly send a chill right down your spine? Well, the fear of death isn't just about physical pain. It's deeply, deeply tangled up in our identity, our attachments, and the frankly terrifying mystery of what it means to be aware that one day awareness itself might just stop. Let's start with Section 1, the burden of awareness and how our minds project the end. You see, the very first layer of this fear stems from a pretty unique human burden, and that's self-awareness. Think about a tiger in a forest. It doesn't sit around contemplating its own non-existence, right? It just reacts to immediate danger and flees from pain. But the human mind? We project into the future. We can actually sit and imagine a moment when we no longer exist. Now, don't get me wrong, that incredible ability gives us civilization, planning, art, imagination, the whole shebang. But it also creates deep existential anxiety. Because once a mind can look far enough ahead to see its own disappearance, fear goes from being just a reflex to something much heavier. Which brings us to Section 2, the biology of fear, or as I like to think of it, the loudest alarm nature ever built. We really need to reframe this fear. It's not a weakness at all. It's a brilliant, foundational biological feature. At the most basic level, your brain is just trying to protect your body from specific, hardwired evolutionary threats: loss, injury, separation, helplessness, and extinction. Death represents the absolute culmination of all 5 of these threats at once, because it permanently shuts down all future possibilities. So that sudden feeling of dread you get in the middle of the night, it is literally the loudest alarm nature ever built into your mind just to keep you alive. Moving on to Section 3, facing the ultimate unknown, the mind's absolute hatred of uncertainty. If we look at our psychology, the mind absolutely despises uncertainty. If a danger is visible, we can prepare for it. We can imagine pain, we can imagine sleep, we can even imagine losing a job. But true non-existence, it totally escapes our normal imagination, because there is absolutely no return ticket. We simply can't simulate being absent from the world while still being present to, verify it. Death takes the fear of the dark and the fear of deep water, and it adds this heavy, heavy layer on top, the utter inability to know what comes next. All right, Section 4. Attachments and unfinished potential, the rupture of me and us. Because death threatens way more than just the physical end of our breathing. In fact, the absolute largest fear most people carry is leaving loved ones behind, this sudden, violent rupture in our relationships. Following right behind that is the dissolution of this self. That's the terrifying idea that your memories, your quirks, your habits, everything that makes you you will just vanish. Toss in the anxiety over unfinished goals and this ultimate loss of control, and you can easily see why the human ego struggles so hard to accept an event it just can't negotiate with. It all boils down to this. To love someone is to know that one day loss may arrive. We aren't isolated units. The fear of leaving people behind is basically the heavy tax we pay for the bonds we build with our family, our partners, our friends. That knowledge makes love infinitely more precious, for sure, but it definitely makes our mortality significantly harder to face. And that takes us to Section 5, the engine of civilization, and how we answer death by creating meaning. So, how in the world does humanity cope with this overwhelming dread? Without some kind of framework, facing a finite timeline is honestly paralyzing. So we adapt. We create symbolic systems, religions, philosophies, deep rituals, just to make death thinkable. We passionately throw ourselves into ambition, art, science, or raising families. And why do we do it? Because we are desperately trying to leave traces. We want to establish significance. A life that matters feels fundamentally less threatened by the void. And in a really wild way, the fear of death actually becomes this hidden engine that pushes all of human civilization forward. Finally, Section 6, the paradox of death. Why the limit gives life its weight. Without the limit, the moment would not matter as much. Really think about that for a second. If we were immortal, urgency would just be completely gone. A beautiful sunrise, a long hug, or that deep late-night conversation with your best friend, they're precious precisely because we won't get to experience them forever. Our incredibly short timeline gives every single day its weight. It's a crazy paradox, right?
The very thing we fear the most is exactly what makes everything else matter so intensely.
So, the fear of death doesn't have to be a prison. It can actually be a profoundly effective teacher. When we stop denying our mortality and just honestly accept it, it stops us from wasting time pretending the clock isn't ticking. It acts as a filter, clarifying what's truly important, pushing us to love better, to forgive a lot faster. It literally transforms fear into present awareness. Ultimately, it turns ordinary, mundane moments into sacred ones. People who face death honestly often find themselves living with so much more clarity and immense gratitude for the time they actually do have.
At the end of the day, we fear death because we are built to live. We're built to attach, to imagine, and to hope. We don't fear death because life is meaningless. We fear it because life matters so much that losing it feels impossible. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on today. Once you know the story ends, what is your story for?